So I'm Casey Farrell. I'm the new member for Lyons, a Labor member for Lyons. I've come in after Rebecca White has been elected to the federal parliament, and we're here at the Deloraine train park. Beautiful day.
Can you talk about what you love about politics and why you ran?
Yeah, oh look, two great questions. So I've been involved in politics and with the Labor Party probably since about my early 20s, I think. Got involved with it then, and at the time it was never my intention to actually run. I was really keen to be involved with my representatives. I was working in technology businesses, and I was really driven by the potential that Tasmania has in terms of a great place to live, great part of the world, and that those kind of early businesses, and particularly technology businesses, had the opportunity that they had to make an impact on a global scale from wherever in Tasmania people might want to be. And I grew up in New Norfolk in the Derwent Valley, so I love regional Tasmania. I love the cities are great, but I think the regional towns like this one, like New Norfolk, dotted around the east coast, there's so many beautiful places to live and raise a family. And so I was really enthused by the opportunity, and I felt like the government probably haven't been doing enough over decades to really recognise the fact that Tasmania has this amazing opportunity, and to allow Tasmanians to stand up proudly and say, we can change the world from here if that's what we want to do. But also, regardless of what it is that people want to do in life, recognising that Tasmania is a fantastic place to do it. And so that's really what encouraged me to throw my hat in the ring and give it a go at the election last year. And I had a great time campaigning and getting around the whole electorate, meeting heaps of people. Like, it was an absolutely fantastic time. And I wasn't elected at that moment, went back to my regular life, and then of course have been given the amazing privilege to step in where Rebecca White has stepped out and is representing us now in Canberra, to represent the people of Lyons and regional Tasmania and Tasmania more broadly. And it's a fantastic opportunity, great privilege.
Can you talk a bit about the process, how you were elected?
Yeah, sure. How nerdy do you want to go with it?
Well, as much as you feel comfortable going into, because some people are very interested.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I guess I'm interested to know what is the actual process.
Yeah, sure.
Because obviously there's a change.
Yep.
Beck White is doing something else.
She is.
And how does it work?
How does it all happen? So because we have the Hare-Clark electoral system and we have multi-member electorates, when there is a vacancy, so when someone who was elected resigns, there's a fairly complex process that happens behind the scenes to work out the fairest way to replace that member of parliament. It's designed around this idea of, if the person who's resigned or who has stepped away wasn't on the ballot paper at the time that they were elected, who would have been elected instead? And so rather than just going out and having a by-election, which is what happens in single-member electorates, because of course then that gives everyone another opportunity to have their say, this is really designed around the people who elected the person who's resigned, who would they have elected next? And so it's quite complex, the maths around how that all works, because everyone's vote becomes worth a portion of it and that kind of stuff. A lot of stuff going on in the background, but the Electoral Commission do a great job of not having to make people worry about that too much. But they basically got all the votes for the people who voted for Rebecca White and elected her to Parliament. And then they started distributing them to who was number 2 on the ballot, and then who was number 3 and number 4 and so on as they reduced the number of people in the count. So the same as at the normal election, the people who had the least amount of votes, they would exclude them from the count, and then they would pass those votes on until the point that they got to someone having more than half of the votes, or there were only 2 candidates left, and then the person with the most votes was the one who was elected. They give you about 2 weeks to nominate. Anyone who had sought election at the same time as Rebecca but hadn't been elected is given the opportunity to be part of the count. And so I nominated, along with all of the other Labor candidates and a few candidates from other parties as well. And then that whole process of counting those votes took about a day and a half. At the very start of that count, I was in second place, and I was in second place almost the entire way through. And then for the last few distributions of votes, the positions actually jumped around a lot. So I went from second place into third place, and someone else went into first place, and then there was someone else's votes were cut and distributed, and then I went from third place into first place, and then second and third moved around a bit, but that all happened over a few hours on a Tuesday evening. So I was elected at 7:30 at night on my daughter's birthday, and the phone started ringing. People were keen to talk to me, and I put the phone down and sang happy birthday and did all of that. But then, the next morning at 9 a.m. I was at Parliament House and then walked into Parliament at 10 o'clock as a new member. So it was really a very rapid turnaround once all of the complex counting had been done.
That's very quick. Do you remember roughly how many votes we were talking? It sounds very tight, especially towards the end.
I don't remember the exact numbers, but because Rebecca was elected with about a quota and then another 0.7 of a quota, I think. And so whatever those numbers are, I think a quota is somewhere around 9,500 to 10,000 votes, something like that. I could be completely off with that, but from memory, that's about where it's at. And the votes that were distributed were effectively a quota's worth. So even though she had more than that, they do the complex maths to make it equal 1. And then I feel like there were about a couple of hundred votes in it the whole way through, which at that time was a fairly big margin. And so when I was in second place at the beginning, honestly, my thoughts were I will probably be in second place at the end. And I think every time that another person was excluded and the votes were distributed, I think I crept up a little bit compared to the person in first place, but it was only ever a tiny amount. And I just thought, this is going to be the pattern. I'll probably keep doing a little bit better, but not get there in the end. But then, like I said, with those last few cut-ups, it just went all over the place. It was for a while anyone's game, because even though a couple of hundred votes at that point seems like a fairly big obstacle to overcome, there was so much variation in how people voted for their second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth preference that actually it did, that hundreds of votes difference were made at each cut. So it did move around a fair bit. I think from memory I ended up being elected with a margin of about 250 votes compared to who was second on the ballot. But honestly, at that point in time, it was the ringing of my phone that was the first knowledge that I had that I'd been elected. And so I'm not even sure if I looked at the numbers at the end of the day or just answered a phone call and someone said, that you're about to be elected, so get prepared to walk into Parliament tomorrow.
Whew. Can you talk a bit about your background?
Sure. So I grew up in the Derwent Valley, have lived there all of my life. Went to school first in the Derwent Valley, and then I went into Hobart for high school and college. I studied a technology degree remotely, which at the time, because that was a few decades ago now, at the time was quite unusual, but now is a very common thing for people to do. But I studied with a Melbourne university, and the first time I ever set foot on campus was to get my graduation gown. I hadn't actually been on campus before that. And so I had grown up with a real affinity for technology and started working in the industry for a multinational company with an office in Hobart. So I was based in Hobart, but as I said, living in the Derwent Valley. And it became really clear to me that while there was a lot of really skilled individuals in Tasmania, there was a real attitude, particularly from multinational companies, that there just weren't the opportunities here, or they weren't willing to provide the opportunities here. And about 6 years into that job, I had a conversation with my manager. I'd been travelling all around Australia teaching people how to use our software, working out requirements with big government departments and big corporates. And I had a conversation with my manager and I said, look, I want to keep working here. What are the opportunities? And he told me that I could either go to Sydney, or I could go to London, or I could go to the United States where they were setting up a new office. And I said, look, I want to stay here. I'm pretty grounded. I'm setting up my life and I've got plans for family, and I want to stay in Tasmania. What are the opportunities? And he said, they're just not here. If you want to advance in your career, you have to go somewhere else. And I really didn't like being told that. And so I resigned from that job, started my own business in the same industry with a real focus on creating opportunities for smart Tasmanians, hardworking Tasmanians to access global markets, but to create great lives for themselves here. And that business now, the employees of that business, some of them have been there for 10 years, and they're taking over the business now as I transition into the new role that I've got. And I couldn't be more proud of that business and the opportunities that it created. There's a fair bit of business that they're doing here in the state and in the rest of the country, but they're also doing work for businesses overseas, a really high quality work. They've won heaps of awards for the work that they've done. And it was driven by my refusal to accept that you couldn't do things like that in Tasmania. And that kind of really continued to drive me, and I think a lot of what I see as the opportunity for Parliament and for government in Tasmania is to really give a leg up to Tasmanians who are doing extraordinary things. There are a lot of people who are out there taking that risky step of going, you know what, I know it's a little bit harder to do things here, but I'm going to do it here anyway. And there are some amazing stories all around the state of people who have made that decision. And I think that there are an enormous amount of Tasmanians who would do that if there was someone backing them in and saying, you know what, you can do that from here. You can do creative things that are the best in the world. You can do business things that are the best in the world. You can do things with technology that are the best in the world. And there are people doing it, but there are plenty more people in Tasmania that have the skills to be able to do that, but they haven't necessarily been given the foundation for a great opportunity. And I really think that's government's role to play, is to make sure that Tasmanians don't ever feel like they can't do things from here, don't ever feel like they need to leave in order to have their best opportunities, and to feel like they can take that risk of kind of stepping out and doing something extraordinary and making a real difference.
Can you talk about some of the other areas you might be passionate about?
I think a lot of my passion in terms of this role comes from that idea of creating opportunity, but some of the stumbling blocks, some of the things that are stopping people from doing their best work, kind of fundamental government service issues. People need to have a health system that they can rely upon and know that if they need it, that they can access it, and not be worried about what will happen, not be unfairly dragged down by health issues that they might have because they need to travel interstate to get the health care that they need, or they need to move their family so that they can live closer to emergency care because they're at risk, or just don't have the confidence that the local facilities can provide them health care and safety that they need. And so I think healthcare is a big one, and particularly in regional Tasmania, of making sure that people feel really confident that no matter where they live in Tasmania, they can access that. Education, ensuring that local schools, all the way from pre-primary school, like early years learning, that the facilities and that the educators are supported. They're providing a fantastic opportunity for kids to provide education that they need all the way through to graduation university, and then continued learning opportunities for adults as well. I think that where we still have an education system that is geared around this idea that people will complete their formal education and go into a job and do that job for 40, 50, 60 years and never have to retrain. And the reality now is that's not the case. People are going into jobs now that won't exist by the time they retire, but people are choosing to have a few different careers in their lives as well. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done around an education system that acknowledges that's the fact and provides opportunities for people at any point in their career to have access to retrain and to find new opportunities that suit where they live, what they want to achieve in life. Similarly, public safety around policing. There are lots of regional areas where the police are doing a fantastic job, but the resources that are provided by government aren't giving people the confidence that they have safety in their local communities. And all of these kind of things, all of those government services, I think the foundations need to be there in order for people to take the risk of saying, you know what, I'm going to do something pretty bold because I know that I have the safety net that Tasmania can afford to give all of Tasmanians, in order for them to take the risk and do something really bold and really interesting.
You mentioned the 9 a.m. walk into Parliament. Are there any other memorable moments that you've had so far?
I think Parliament's a really interesting place, and I, as most Tasmanians, really had no idea of what it would be like being in there. The staff are incredible. Everyone wants you to be able to do what you need to do. It's not like you're going in there and all of a sudden you need to read all these books about how things work, and if you stuff it up, you don't get another chance. And I've misstepped a few times in Parliament and the speakers pick me up on it, but everyone can go through that, and it is designed around the idea that anyone can be a member of Parliament. You don't need to understand how Parliament works to go in there. They're the kind of things that you can learn. I think probably my most memorable experience in Parliament so far has been giving my first speech. So there are a whole bunch of rules around what you can and can't do before you give your first speech. So you're quite limited as a new member of parliament to contribute to debate until you've given your first speech. But it's a wonderful kind of ceremonial thing that parliaments do, where you've got, I think, 30 minutes. I think I took 15 or 20 to talk about yourself and why you're in parliament, and some stories from your life that are really meaningful. And it was lovely to be able to share those. But then after that happens, all of the members of the parliament line up and shake your hand and welcome you to parliament. And I think that was a really nice moment, because it's what people see of parliament, of course, is each political party, each of the independents arguing with each other across the chamber and debating bills. And that's obviously a very important part, and making sure that we scrutinise the government and keep everyone to account. Now, that's what opposition is there in parliament for, and so what I'm there for. But knowing that you're all humans and you're all going through the same thing, and having that amazing welcome, I think, really memorable.
Any particularly supportive people, whether in the party, another party?
Yep. Yeah, the Labor whip is Meg Brown, member for Franklin. She was elected at last year's election, so she's only just over a year in, but her job as the whip is to make sure that new parliamentarians know what they can and can't do in parliament, and she's been extraordinary, very generous with the time, and a really big help for me to make sure I know what I'm doing. But I honestly haven't come across anyone who isn't willing to give up their time to help. Everyone wants Parliament to work. They want to work collaboratively with each other, and we have differences of opinion as we do, but that's the point of it, to be representative of our communities. And so I don't think anyone's shied away from helping.
I've got two more questions. The first one is, are you familiar with areas that tend to vote a certain way? And do you see that changing at all? It's a very general question.
Sure.
I'm just interested in, my limited understanding is that there are parts of Lyons in the south that vote very differently to the north.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about that to start with?
Yeah. Lyons is fantastic as an electorate, for anyone that's a bit of a politics or voting nerd, because we don't have any really major population centres. What we have are a whole bunch of small and large towns or centres of population, and there are patterns that you can find throughout each in terms of how people vote. But there's also things that are local, and I don't know who originally said it, but one of the mantras that gets thrown around about politics, particularly in Tasmania, is that all politics is local, and you will absolutely find that, is that an entire town can turn the way they vote on a single issue. And so if there is something that comes up that the government's proposing that it impacts a town and they don't like it, you can see them change their vote, their whole town change their vote in a massive swing against the government. Or equally, if there is an opportunity that's provided by government, you can see the opposite happen, and a lot of support get behind them. Every area of Lyons has local issues, and everyone that I talk to as I get around the state, I'm becoming more and more informed about what those local issues are. But yes, there are patterns in terms of, you can have a look at how the south votes compared to the north. You can look at patterns in terms of the general wealth in the area, or the access to government services, or the population density, and you can draw a whole lot of things from that. But I think that and particularly what we've seen with the recent federal election, is that there are a lot of people who voted Labor who, if you had done the analysis beforehand, were not people who would vote Labor. And they chose to put their faith in Rebecca White for a whole lot of reasons. Obviously, Rebecca has worked really hard, and she's very well recognised for that. And so there's a lot of support for Rebecca. There's a lot of support for the Labor government, and there were concerns about the other options that people had. So I think that overall, Tasmanians are very well informed and thoughtful about politics, and even people that you meet in the street who tell you that they don't care about politics, if you scratch below the surface, actually they might not see it as such, but they do have really significant thoughts about it, because politics does affect everyone. And it affects everyone in a lot of different ways, and so people's attitudes towards politics and decisions on who to vote for come from different places. But the results of the recent election and the polling that's followed, I think, shows that you can't take any of those patterns for granted. And actually what Tasmanians want are people that will work for them really hard, that will listen and understand what the issues are that are important to them. And even if they don't necessarily represent those concerns in Parliament, that people that they can trust to actually be honest and authentic about what they want for the world, and people will rally behind that. And that's what's going to be important to me as a representative of Lyons, and seeking people's endorsement to continue in this role beyond whenever the next election is. That I hope that whether or not we agree on certain issues, that people can see that I genuinely care about everyone, every town, every community around Lyons, that I want to represent it in the best way that I possibly can to get the best results for everyone, and that I will listen and I will spend the time and I will travel wherever I need to travel in order to make sure that I'm doing the best in representing those people.
Just going back a little bit, what do you think were the important issues for Tasmanians in the federal election?
It's a really big question, I think. There are a lot of people who will have voted on particular issues. There are a lot of people who, for lack of a better phrasing, who would have voted on the vibe of the thing. Once they saw what the coalition were offering compared to what the Labor government had provided, it might not have been particular issues, but just a general feeling of this feels better for me than that. The work that I did campaigning alongside Beck, and I did more of it before I got elected because then I had other things that I needed to do, obviously. Healthcare was such a big thing that came up. Healthcare, cost of living were really the two issues that came up on the doors. They came up at the polling booths when people were going to vote. And I think that at the end of the day, people came around to trust the Labor government more with healthcare, access to healthcare and cost of living, and particularly the free healthcare that's provided by Medicare. I think that also ties into the cost of living, but what people have seen is that even people of my age, people with young families, they've seen that 20 years ago it was much easier to access a doctor who wouldn't charge you, who would charge to, using bulk billing, charge to Medicare. Whereas today it's actually really difficult to find doctors who will do that, particularly for adults. There are more doctors who will do it for children, to see children, but in terms of getting to your GP and then paying $80, $90, $100, $150 just to see your GP, that is bad for, obviously, cost of living. The additional expense is really hard for families to justify or afford, but it's also really bad in terms of access to healthcare, because people will then be making decisions about whether to see their GP or whether they can feed their kids a good meal. And they're not the kind of decisions that in a country as wealthy as Australia people should be making. And I think that the narrative from the Albanese Labor government about the improvements that are going to be made to Medicare, to the pharmaceutical benefit scheme, so reducing the price of regular medications that people get, I think people saw that, one, that's going to help ease the cost of living that everyone has, but two, it's going to make healthcare more accessible and people will feel more confident when they've got access to good public healthcare, which is something that it's such an Australian thing to have. It's such an important thing to the fabric of Australian society to have access to free healthcare, and they trust the Albanese government to continue providing it.
Last question, what's your favourite part of the Meander Valley?
It's a great question. There are so many things to love. Just down the road here, I took the kids down there once. I can't even remember what I was in Deloraine for, but there's a section of the road down there where the tree canopy comes across the road, and the kids got so excited about it because they had recently been watching the Japanese film My Neighbor Totoro, and there's a scene in there where I think the kids are in the film, the kids are at their new house and they get really excited about the tree tunnel. And drove my kids down that road, and they got really excited about this tree canopy and that it was a tree tunnel. And I think on that day we probably drove up and down 5 or 6 times on the road because they just loved that idea. So yeah, really that's got a special place in my heart. I think Deloraine itself is a lovely town, but there's a huge amount of parts of the Meander Valley that are great. In terms of my favourite part, I'm a really big fan of the Highland Lakes Road. Living in the Derwent Valley, but having a job where I travel both to the north and to the northwest coast, I have told so many people in my life about the Highland Lakes Road and how they should take, even if they're driving to Launceston, drive the Highland Lakes Road. It's just a different experience. And that section of the road just out of Deloraine that connects up to the Highland Lakes Road, that's probably, it's a spot in the Meander Valley that just puts a grin on my face, because I know the amazing part of this state that I'm about to experience by heading up the hill and into the highlands. So that's probably it.